Edgar Allan Poe, again, Telltale Heart. True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why would you say I'm mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It isn't possible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me night and day. Object, there was none. Passion, there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold, I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. It was his eye. He had the eye of a vulture. A pale blue eye, with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded. With what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh, so gently. And then, when I had made it an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, that no light shone out. And then I thrust my head in. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it so slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening, so far I could see him as he lay on his bed. Would a madman been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I did it so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture's eye. And as I did this for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight, but I found the eye always closed, and it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, inquiring how his night had passed. So you see, he would have had to have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious, opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could hardly contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door, little by little, and he'd not even dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think I drew back, but no! His room was pitch as black, with a thick darkness, for the shutters were closed, fastened through fear of robbers. And so I knew he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it, steadily, steadily. I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up into bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For the whole hour, I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime, I did not hear him lying down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening, just as I had done night after night, hearkening to the death watches on the wall. Presently, I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or grief. Oh, no, it was the little stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I know the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it had welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and I pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew he had been lying awake ever since the first slight of noise when he had turned in the bed. His fears had ever been growing since. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It's nothing. Just wind in the chimney. Only a mouse crossing the floor. Or it's merely a cricket who made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these superstitions, but he found it all in vain. In vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him, and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he never saw or heard, to feel the presence of my head in the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You can't imagine how stealthily, until at length a simple, dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot out from the crevice and fell fully upon the vulture. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctiveness, all dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else in the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct, precisely on the damned spot. And have I not told you what mistake for madness, but over acuteness of sense? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet, I refrained and kept still. I barely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could to maintain the ray upon the eve. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, louder and louder with every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder. I say louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I've told you I am nervous, so I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer, I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder and louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now, a new anxiety seized upon me. The sound would be heard by the neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leapt onto the bed. He shrieked once, only once. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length, it ceased. The old man was dead. He's dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head, the arms, and the legs. And then I took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited it all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught it off. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what now had I to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by the neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what did I have to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them to rest from their fatigues, while I, myself, with a wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale, and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still I sat, still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of that feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness until at length I found the noise not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound. Much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I rose and argued about trifles on a high key with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I placed the four to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh, God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over it all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think, but anything was better than this agony. Anything was more terrible than this derision. I'd bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt I must scream or die, and now again, hark! Louder! 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 Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more! I admit the deed! Tear up the planks! Here! Here! It is the beating of his hideous heart! And that is the end of it. This is, again, Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. I hope you all enjoyed that one. It is one of my favorite. Okay, so I think the next story we will go ahead and do, I think would be Dagon by H.P. Lovecraft. Alrighty. Give me one quick moment. I'm going to have a little bit of drink of water, and then we'll go ahead and get started with the next one. It should still be running. I understand there is some buffering problems, some issues. I do apologize. Again, hopefully next week, this will not, or Sunday, this will not be an issue any longer. Thank you guys for
hanging out and listening. I greatly appreciate it. It means a lot to me, you all. Thank you so very much. So just one more moment, and we will go ahead and get started with Dagon by H.P. Lovecraft. Just going to have a drink of water and get started. I am writing this under appreciable mental strain since by tonight I shall be no more. Penniless, and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below. Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate. When have you heard these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is I must have forgetfulness or death. It was one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell victim to the German sea raider. The Great War was then at only its beginning. The ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation, so that our vessel was made legitimate prize. Whilst her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due to us naval prisoners. So liberal, indeed, was the discipline of our captives that 5 days after we were taken, I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time. When I found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings. Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhere south of the equator. Of the longitude I knew nothing. There was no island or coastline in sight. The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land. But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastness of unbroken blue. The change happened while I slept. The details I shall never know, for my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous. When at last I awaked, it was to discover myself had half sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire which extended about me in a monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat had lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected the transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished. For there was in the air and in the rotting soil a sinister quality which chilled me to my very core. The region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish and of other less describable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending plain. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and barren immensity. There was nothing within hearing, and nothing in sight save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and homogeny of the landscape oppressed me with nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet. As I crawled on into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position. Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing regions through innumerable millions of years had laid hidden under unfathomable watery depths. So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, strain my ears as I might, nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead things. For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay on its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for traveling purposes in a short time. That night I slept but a little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory for an overland journey in search of the vanished she and possible rescue. On the third morning, I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease. The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things in the mind to so slight evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal. All day, I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation in the rolling desert. The night I encamped, and on the following day still traveled towards the hummock, though that object seemed scarcely nearer than I first espied it. By the fourth evening, I had attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had first appeared from a distance, an intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill. I know not why my dreams were so wild, but ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain, I woke in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were just too much for me to endure again. In the glow of the moon, I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at sunset. Packing up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence. I had said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling hills was a source of a vague horror to me, but I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked to the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recesses the moon had yet not soared high enough to illuminate. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into the fathomless chaos of eternal night. Though my terror ran curious, reminiscent of Paradise Lost, and of Satan's hideous climb through the unfashioned realms of darkness. As the moon climbed higher to the sky, I began to see the slopes of the valley were not quite so perpendicular as I had imagined. Ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent, whilst after a drop of a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual. Urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentle slope beneath it, gazing into the Stygian deeps where no light had yet penetrated. All at once, my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me, an object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon. That was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself, but I was conscious of a distinct impression that its contour and position were not altogether a work of nature. A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations that I cannot express, for despite its enormous magnitude and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith whose massive hulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living, thinking creatures. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely. The moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed into the chasm, and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions, and almost slapping at my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the cyclopean monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude scriptures. The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me, and unlike anything I'd ever seen in the books, consisting of, for the most part, conventionalistic aquatic symbols such as fishes and eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and like. Several characters obviously represented marine things that were known to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did most to hold me spellbound. Plainly visible across the intervening water on account of their enormous size was an array of bas-reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of the door. I think these things are supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men, though the creatures were shown disporting like fishes in waters of some marine grotto, paying homage at some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well. Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for mere remembrance makes me grow faint. Grotesque beyond the imaginations of a pole or bowler, they were damnably human in general outline, despite webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide and flabby lips, glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seem to have been chiseled badly out of proportion with their scenic background. For one of the creatures was shewn in the act of killing a whale, represented as but a little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size, but in a moment decided they are merely imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe. Some tribe whose last descent had perished eras before the first ancestor of Piltdown or Neanderthal man was born. Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into the vast beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then suddenly I saw it. With only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters. Vast, Polyphemus-like, and loathsome. It darted like stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, and while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds, I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the sloping cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember little. I believe I sang a great deal, and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. I have indistinct recollections of a great storm sometime after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know I heard peals of thunder and other tones which nature utters only in her wildest moods. When I came out of the shadows, I was in San Francisco hospital, brought thither by the captain of an American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In delirium I had said much, but my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing, nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which they could not believe. Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist and mused with him the peculiar questions regarding ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god. But soon, perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I didn't press my inquiries. It is at night, especially when the moon is gibbous and waning, that I see the thing. I tried morphine, but the drug has given only transient circus, and has drawn me to its clutches in a hopeless slave. So now I'm to end it all, having written a full account for the information or the contemptuous amusement of my fellow men. Often I ask myself if it could not have been a phantasm, a mere freak of fever as I lay sun-stricken and raving in an open boat after my escape of the German man-of-war. This I ask myself, but does there come before me a hideous, vivid vision in reply? I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that at the very moment be crawling and floundering in the slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stone idols and carving their own detestable likenesses on submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite. I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows to drag down with their raking talons the remnants of puny war and exhausted mankind. Of a day when the land shall sink and the ocean floor shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium. The end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as if some immense slippery body lumbering against it. It shall not find me. That God, the hand, the window, the window! And that was the end. Okay.